أيا طالب العلم قم لا تنم فإن الزمان انقضى. أيا طالب العلم قم لا تنم فإن الزمان انقضى وانصرم.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وبعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. All praise and thanks belong to Allah Azza wa Jal, the Lord, creator and sustainer of the heavens and the earth. We place our choicest greetings and blessings upon the most beloved of Allah's creation, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his family members, upon his companions, and upon all of those who follow his blessed way of life until the end of times. Allah Azza wa Jal make us from them. Ameen. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. I welcome each and every one of you back to our reading of the text called منظومة المفطرات المعاصرة, which basically translates as the poem, the didactic poem that deals with the modern nullifiers. So generally the scholars recommend to us that we study the works of the classical ulama, right? And this work here has been written by a contemporary, someone who's still alive today. But the beauty of this is he took the Rasā'i'l Muhimma, the important issues with regards to those things that break your fast, and he turned them he changed it to a poem. He made it into a poem. And the reason for this, the scholars say, is al-kalam al-manzūm, words that are made into poetry, aysar lil hifz, is easier to memorize. And so if someone memorizes all the Masā'il in here, he will know the preponderant view of the Shafi madhab on these issues. So obviously, as we mentioned, the Nazim, the author of this poem, or the composer of the poem, he is a Shafi'i. And so obviously, he will be relating the views of the contemporary Shafi'is. He will be relating the views of the contemporary and, pre-contemporary, those who came a few hundred years ago. He will be relating their views on many of these issues, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. What we'll be doing in this class, inshallah, for the sake of benefit, if there's difference of opinion on a particular topic, we will mention those differences of opinion. We'll also attempt to mention the arguments, the ta'lilat and the adilla, the evidences and the rational reasonings behind the issues, inshallah. We'll mention if there's an alternative view. This is the standard view within the Shafi madhab, but this is the view of other scholars on this particular issue. And this will increase the enrichment, inshallah ta'ala, of this class. So last week, bi'idhnillah, with Allah's permission, we started the Muqaddimatul Nazim. And the Muqaddimah was Alhamdulillahi alladhi qidman katab على عباده الصيام فوجب ثم صلاة الله والسلام على الذي علا به الصيام وآله وصحبه الكرام ما غردت سواجع الحمام وبعد ذي مسائل معاصرة وحكمها في الشافعية فره نظمت ما جمعه اللبيب وهو حقا نبه لبيب وزدت بعض نظر قليل بذهن المقصر الكليل فهو كما ترى ومن قرأ درى وفي الصباح يحمد القوم السراح. So we did the introduction of the author rahimahullah or hafidhahullah, and we're not going to do that again, inshallah ta'ala. Anyone who needs to go through the muqaddimah, feel free to do so, inshallah ta'ala. So inshallah ta'ala, this week we will do some muqaddimat, some introductions, inshallah, that we did not do last week, and then we'll start with the text. So the first part of the text, inshallah, is ما يفطر بلا خلاف ولا تفصيل. That which, according to the Shafi madhab, ma, this is ma mawsula, that which yufattir, that which breaks the fast, bila khilaf, without difference of opinion, fil madhab al-Shafi'i, in the Shafi school, wala tafsil. What is tafsil? Tafsil is, in certain masail, the madhab will say it breaks your fast. Just one answer, mutlaqan, unconditionally. In certain masail, the madhab will say it does not break your fast, mutlaqan, unconditionally. And in some masail, the madhab will say it breaks your fast ala hasab al-tafsil, based upon this, scenario. If this happens, it breaks your fast. If that happens, it doesn't break your fast. So the first category he says is ma yufattir bila khilafin wala tafsil. And then he mentions بخاخ ربو والدخان أكمله مداعة وشيشة معسلة كذا التحاميل ومنظار وصل بفمه ودبر أو القبل والفطر واقع بفحص مهبلي لأنه للجوف ذو توصل. So he mentions a few things. It's about, say, about 8, 9 things that we will extrapolate from these 3 lines. He says, بخاخ ربو, the asthma pump. So the asthma pump breaks the fast. في المذهب الشافعي عند المعاصرين. والدخان, and all أكمل, and all types of smoking. All types of smoking. So that is dukhan, cigarettes, mada'a. Mada'a is the instrument, like the hookah, what we call in South Africa the oka pipe, the shisha pipe, basically the instrument that you use. Washisha, it basically means the same thing. Mu'assila. Mu'assila is the flavor, the things that they used, then they put it in this hookah pipe and smoke. So the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, mentions about 3 or 4 things that's actually the same, but the purpose of why he mentions it is for the nazm, for the flow of the poem, but all of them have the same ruling. He then says, كَذَا التَّحَامِيلُ. He says similarly, tahamil. Tahamil refers to suppositories, and we'll discuss the different types of suppositories. That which enters the front and the back. وَمِنْظَارٌ, and we'll discuss enemas and stuff like that. So generally a suppository is it's hard, it's a capsule, and the enema is a liquid that goes up into the rectum of the individual. وَمِنْظَارٌ وَصَلٌ. We will also speak about the different types of scopes that goes down a person. He says, wasal, that which reaches bifamihi, through his mouth, وَدُبُرٍ وَالْقُبُلْ, or that which enters through the backside, the rectum, or the qubul, the front. وَالْفِطْرُ وَاقِعٌ بِفَحْصٍ مَهْبَلِ. He says, also the fast is broken. واقع. Al-fitr waqi means the fast is broken. بِفَحْصٍ مَهْبَلِ, through a vaginal examination, and we'll discuss the different types over there. لِأَنَّهُ لِلْجَوْفِ ذُو تَوَصُّلِ, because he says it reaches the jawf. ذُو تَوَصُّلِ, it reaches the jawf. And so that's the vocabulary over there. And there's a lot of masail, inshallah ta'ala. Perhaps we'll take these 3 abiyat and we'll complete it over 2 weeks, inshallah. Because there's a lot of masail over there, inshallah ta'ala. So there are some muqaddimat, inshallah ta'ala, that I would like to discuss with you. Some introductory points, inshallah ta'ala. So awalan, number 1 is the nullifiers of fasting. The nullifiers of fasting. According to the ijma' of ulama, that which is agreed upon by consensus, the things that break your fast are 3. Number 1, eating, drinking, and intimacy. Those are the 3 things that break your fast ijma'an. The issue of vomiting, willful vomiting, that is what most of the scholars have stated, but it's not a matter of ijma'. So technically there are only 3 things that all scholars agree that breaks your fast. That breaks your fast. Obviously the Shafi madhab has a wider scope of things that break your fast, but I'm speaking about those matters that are mujma' alayha, those matters that are agreed upon. The Shafi madhab adds a few things. There's a beautiful poem in the famous Shafi text, the Hashia, called I'anatul Talibin, where the Mu'allif rahimahullah, the Muhashi, he brings 10 things according to the Shafi madhab that breaks your fast. He says, عشرة مفطرات الصوم فهاكها إغماء كل اليوم. He says, عشرة مفطرات الصوم. There are 10 things that break your fast. فهاكها, take it. And then he mentions it, إغماء كل اليوم, being unconscious for the entirety of the day. إنزاله مباشرا, when someone emits semen, he ejaculates mubashiran, due to touching. وردة, apostasy. والوطء والقيء, intimacy and willful vomiting. إذا تعمد, if he did so intentionally. ثم الجنون, then insanity. الحيض, then there's haid. مع النفاس, with and including nifas. وصول عين, any ain going down, any substance going down. Batnahu, into your jawf. Ma'a rasi, and we include in the jawf the head as well. So the abdominal area and the head. So that's a fa'ida fiqhiyya. Another fa'ida, another point of benefit is what we have to keep in mind. According to the Shafi madhab, This is a dhabit. This is a principle when it comes to the breaking of the fast. It is when usulu ayn, whenever a ayn, a substance, even if it might be little, even if might be non-nutritious, goes down to the jawf, which we will discuss later what is meant by the jawf, through a open passage. Through a open passage. So if something goes down to the jawf, to the abdominal area, وصول عين عرفا كأكل ولو يسيرا إلى ما يسمى جوفا من منفذ مفتوح, and it goes through a natural passage such as the nose, the mouth. The Shafi madhab includes the ihleel, the urinary tract, or the urethra, the rectum, بحيث يدرك فلا يفطر. So that's an important principle when it comes to the nullifying of the fast. Another important principle, as mentioned by Ibn al-Hajar al-Haytami in his Tuhfa, he says, إِنْ عَلِمَ وَتَعَمَّدَ وَاخْتَارَ. It only breaks your fast if you did it knowingly, intentionally, and out of choice. So that's another principle. When Ibn Hajar al-Haytami speaks about making yourself vomit in Tuhfat al-Muhtaj, he says, من عالم مختار أما ناس وجاهل عذر لقرب إسلامي أو بعده عن عالم ذلك ومقرأ فلا يفطرون بذلك وكذا كل مفطر. He says, if it happens from someone who did so intentionally, knowingly, and out of choice. So that's another principle when it comes to the mufattirat. Anything for it to break your fast, it should have been done knowingly, that it's haram, intentionally, and out of choice. If you do not fulfill one of those conditions, then it doesn't break the fast. Another muqaddimah of fasting. The types of people in relation to that which breaks the fast. The types of people in relation to that which breaks the fast. Number one, al-qism al-awwal, ma yalzam fihi al-qada wal-fidya. When you break your fast, the first category is, when you break your fast, it is necessary to make qada and pay the fidya. To make qada and pay the fidya. And who does this? Number one, the pregnant lady that fears for her unborn child. The pregnant lady that fears for her unborn child. That's number one. Also, the breastfeeding lady that fears for her child. The breastfeeding lady that fears for her child. So these people, when they make qada, when they fear for their kids, one for the unborn child, the other one for her baby, then in those cases, they need to make qada of that day missed, and they need to pay the fidya for each day missed. Number two, anyone who has to make qada before the coming Ramadan, but delays it beyond that. So you had to make qada for the Ramadan of 2026. Ramadan of 2027 came and you never made the qada. For each day missed, you will have to not only make the qada, it's one qada only, but you will have to pay a fidya for each day. And if 2028 comes and you never made qada, then you are liable for another fidya. لأن الفدية تتكرر بتكرر السنين. The fidya will increase based upon the years that pass. The third category of those who pay fidya and who do the qada is anyone who broke his or her fast due to wanting to save a sacred living thing. Example, you saw a dog drowning. A normal dog, not a dog that will attack you. Or you saw a child drowning and you jumped into the water and through that you broke your fast. In those categories we will say qada and fidya is due. And there's a principle. The principle is كل فطر ارتفق فيه شخصان وجب فيه الفدية والقضاء. And that inshallah ta'ala you can reach as Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentions that in his Tuhfa. The second category refers to those people who are only liable to do the qada. There's no fidya. Only qada, no fidya. So القسم الثاني ما يلزم فيه القضاء فقط. First category under that is إذا أفطرت خوفا على نفسها. A pregnant lady, when she and a breastfeeding lady, when they broke their fast, either due to fearing for their own health, أو نفسها وغيرها, or they feared for their health and the health of the child. So either only their health or their health and the health of the child. In this case, there's only qada that's due. And Imam Shirbini rahimahullah ta'ala says in his Mughni al-Muhtaj, in aftarata, if they break their fast, khawfan, out of fear, min husuli dararin, that the harm will come to them, bisawmi, through this fasting, كالضرر الحاصل المريض على نفسهما ولو مع الولد, such as the harm that will come to an ill person if they fear for themselves, ولو مع الولد, even if that includes the child as well. So that's important to keep in mind. So when they fear for themselves, or fear for themselves and that of the health of the child, in this case, there's only qada. There's only qada. Number two, someone who is unconscious from the time of Fajr until the time of Maghrib. That person will only make qada with conditions, and the conditions are if the person caused himself or herself to become unconscious and it lasted for that entire fasting day from Fajr till Maghrib. Number three, someone who forgot to make the intention for fasting, or someone who left the intention intentionally, they didn't make the intention, and anyone who broke their fast for no good reason or for no justifiable reason, as we say, eat after the buck. And this breaking of the fast was not through intimacy, it was through eating and drinking. And the principle over here is إذا اجتمع مانع ومقتضٍ غلب المانع على المقتضي. So that's an important principle, a governing principle when it comes to this mas'ala. The third category is القسم الثالث ما يلزم فيه الفدية فقط. Those who only pay the fidya. There's no qada upon them. And that is الشيخ الكبير الغير قادر على الصوم. The old person that is unable to fast. The person is, maybe person has Alzheimer's, the person is frail, the person is unable to fast. They won't make qada. They will only pay fidya for each day. And المريض الذي لا يرجى شفاؤه, or the person who is terminally ill, or the person who is terminally ill, or the person that has an illness that does not allow that person to fast. In those cases, they will pay fidya for each day, and there's no qada. القسم الرابع, the fourth category is ما لا يلزم فيه الفدية ولا القضاء. Those people who do not make qada, nor do they pay fidya. And that is the insane person, the majnoon, if the insanity was not caused by him or her. The intoxicated person, if the person took some medication and, the person, went under the influence. As long as it wasn't caused by this person. Meaning this person, there was no ta'addi on this person's side. The person didn't abuse a drug that put the person in that state. Maybe the person went for some operation, whatever. They put him under some medication which affected his mind. He became intoxicated. A child, obviously, who's not baligh, or mukallaf for that matter, and a kafir asli, a born non-Muslim. All of those people, there's no qada for them, and there is no fidya upon them. And Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. So that's the next muqaddimah. The fourth muqaddimah is, when it comes to the scholars, when it comes to the nullifiers of fasting, the mufattirāt as-sawm, there are those who are muwassi'un and there are those who are mudayyiqun. Those who are muwassi'un are those who have expanded the scope. They've expanded the amount of things that break your fast. And the mudayyiqun are those who have narrowed the scope of that which breaks your fast. Those who have expanded the scope of things, some scholars say, some madhab say, that there are 60 things that break your fast. Subhanallah. But we know if we do a study of the Quran and the Sunnah, we're not going to find 60 things that break your fast. So those who expand the scope of that which breaks your fast, and that is generally the scholars who are aligned to the various madhahib, they expand the nullifiers of fasting based on different considerations. Number one, their view pertaining to what is considered the jawf. What is the jawf? The stomach, the anus, the brain, the abdominal area, inside of the ears, inside of the skull. Remember, many of these masail, they were based upon, many of these opinions of these scholars, they were based upon the anatomy of the body at the time that they were living. So they will say things, but we know according to science and medicine, that is not the reality. Because they based these fatwa, when they spoke about many of these things, they based it on the knowledge that was prevalent at the time. However, through the development of science and medicine, we've come to different conclusions. So number one, what constitutes the jawf according to the different madhahib? And this differs from madhab to madhab because the sharia has not stipulated this is the jawf. The jawf is not just the tummy. People just say it's the belly, it's the tummy, abdominal area. No. So how far you expand the jawf, if you say the throat is part of the jawf, anything that reaches the throat will nullify your fast. So it's their view of what constitutes a jawf and a body or a bodily cavity. Number two, what constitutes a manfadh maftuh, an open passage? Is the ear an open passage? For example, some scholars will say yes and some scholars will say no. Some scholars will say the ear, there is no link between the ear and the jawf. So anything that enters the ear does not break the fast. However, some other scholars, based upon the anatomy of the body, in their time, they would say, yes, there is a connection and thus it breaks your fast. Another example, anything that enters the eye, the Hanabila, they say, if you apply kuhal and you can feel it in your throat, your fast breaks. Whereas majority of the madhahib states, it doesn't break your fast. So what constitutes an manfadh maftuh? Nose, mouth, ear, vagina, all of those things. And number three, these scholars who expand the scope of those things that break your fast, what constitutes that which enters into a bodily cavity, that which enters into a jawf? The ain, the dakhil. Should it be nutritious or should it not be nutritious? So example, some scholars will say a scope that goes down your mouth breaks your fast. Even if it is unaccompanied by any liquid or oil on there, they will say breaks your fast. Because they say anything that enters through a manfadh maftuh, in this case your mouth, and it goes into the jawf, the abdominal area, will break your fast whether it's nutritious or not. Other scholars will argue and say no. The Quran and the Sunnah came to prohibit eating and drinking. وَمَا فِي صُورَتِهِ وَمَعْنَاهِ, and that which is in the form and meaning of eating and drinking. Anything that doesn't give nourishment to the body, even if it goes into the abdominal area, will not then break your fast. Will not then break your fast. So then there are those scholars who state, who narrow the scope of those things that break your fast. And they say the only things that break your fast is food, drink, and that which is in the form and in the meaning of food and drink. And so many contemporary scholars will say, oh, that doesn't break your fast. Oh, that doesn't break your fast. It goes back to these differences. It goes back to these differences. And Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. So you have to remember one thing, that much of what we say, much of what the fuqaha of the past said was based upon the study of the body, the anatomy of the body at their time. Modern science has come and disproven many of those issues, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. The Hanafis say, ما يصل إلى التجويف البطني وأن ما يصل إلى الدماغ مؤثر لكون منفذ إلى التجويف البطني. They say the jawf refers to the abdominal cavity and what reaches the brain. Not because the brain is a jawf, but because it has a gateway and a passage to the abdominal cavity. So remember, the scholars will say, later scholars of scientists will say, that is there a connection between the brain and the abdominal cavity? They will say, the Maliki say, يُقَصِّرُونَ الْجَوْفِ, they restrict the jawf to the throat, والمعدة, the abdominal area, the stomach, والأمعاء, the intestines, the digestive system. وما يوصل إليها كالدبر وفرج المرأة حسب ظنهم. And that which leads to these things, such as the anus and the vulva of a woman. So they say these things are included because it causes something to reach the stomach, the throat, and the intestines. The Shafi madhab is the madhab that expands the meaning of the jawf the most. And so you will notice when we study these masail, Jumhur will be on one side, the majority of the scholars will be on one side, and the Shafi'is will be on one side. Why? It goes back to the definition of what is considered jawf. They say كل مجوف كباطن الأذن وداخل قحف الرأس والداخل إلى الحلق وإن لم يصل الداخل إليه إلى المعدة وباطن الإحليل على خلاف بينهم في لزوم وصوله إلى المثانة أو عدم لزومه. They say every bodily cavity, every hollow space, such as the inner ear, the inside of the skull, the inside of the throat, even if what enters the throat does not reach the stomach, the inside of the urethra, all of those things they will include in the definition of the jawf. And the Hanbalis are very similar and close to the Shafi'iyah. So that's important to keep in mind, inshallah ta'ala. Now the next issue is, these issues that we are discussing are contemporary issues. These issues are contemporary issues. What is important to keep in mind, when the scholars, when they discuss these masail, they made takhrij upon masail that the ulama mentioned in the past. So example, when they discuss the issue of the scope going down, they will say the fuqaha have spoken about what if you swallow a stone or a piece of wood. These things are not nutritious. So they will try to make a comparison between those things mentioned in the classical fiqh works with things that are contemporaneous to our times. So we gave you examples last week. Last week I mentioned how the fuqaha, the contemporary fuqaha, how they've looked at the ashma pump, for an example. An example of that is that the classical fuqaha, they spoke about in istinshaq bukhar al-at'ima wal-bukhur wa tadawi bihi. Istinshaq, inhaling, bukhar al-at'ima, the steam of food, wal-bukhur, and incense. The second mas'ala is expanding the scope of what is considered eating and drinking when it enters through the mouth. And the third mas'ala is al-mutabakki min al-madmada hala siyam, that those drops of water that remain in your mouth whilst fasting. So the contemporary fuqaha, when they wanted to discuss the issue of does the use of the ashma pump break your fast, they said, let's look at what the classical scholars have said. Some of them, they said there are three possible scenarios that you can connect the ashma pump. You can connect the ashma pump with those that the classical fuqaha have mentioned. Either the inhaling of the steam of food, the bukhar of food, and bukhur. And it can either be included under the mas'ala of eating and drinking because it is something that goes through the mouth, or it can be included in the mas'ala of if you take wudu whilst fasting, there's a big possibility that there are drops of water that remain behind, and those drops of water will eventually go down. That possibility is there. The Sharia has overlooked that. They have tried to compare those masail, that mas'ala, with these three suwar. In the first scenario, the inhaling the istinshaq of the steam of food and incense, bukhur, in this surah, if you make takyif upon this surah, then according to all the madhabs other than the Shafi'iyah, this is a mufattir. This nullifies the fast. If you accept this surah to be the takyif of the ashma inhaler, then according to all the madhabs, the fast will be broken and the inhaler is then أي مفطر إلا الشافعية, except the Shafi'iyya, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. The second takyif is in considering the ashma pump as food and drinks, because it is something that enters through the mouth and there is a certain amount of water in there as well. According to that surah and that takyif, according to all madhabs, your fast will break. The third surah is the water that remains behind whilst taking wudu and you're fasting. According to that surah, then if we say the ashma pump is applicable to that mas'ala, then the fast will not be broken according to all scholars. We will discuss what they do with the ashma pump, inshallah. The endoscopy, which is like a scope that goes down your mouth into your abdominal area. The classical fuqaha spoke about swallowing stones, seeds that does not benefit the body, does not provide nutrition to the body. So it can either be that, because the scope doesn't provide nutrition to your body, it's just for some examination purposes. Another mas'ala that they compare it to is when you enter a string into your abdominal area and the other part of the string is outside. So that's important to keep in mind, inshallah ta'ala. So that's something that I want to discuss with you, inshallah ta'ala, going forward. This is called takhrij. Takhrij here means, or takyif, is when we compare a mas'ala that is contemporaneous to our times with something that the fuqaha have mentioned in the past. And then we extrapolate the ruling. Depending what that classical mas'ala is, we take that ruling and we apply it on this new mas'ala. And I mentioned last week that the scholars say we said many of the fuqaha, when writing on the topic of modern day nullifiers of fasting, they say ilhaqu mas'alatin binadha'iriha awla min ta'sis aslin laha li su'ubat al-istikhraj. Shinwani says that comparing a modern day mas'ala with that which is similar to it is better than establishing a new principle to figure out the ruling of that new mas'ala. Shaykh Ahmad al-Khalil says in his book, which is also المفطرات المعاصرة, he says ودراسة هذه المسائل على ضوء نصوص الكتاب والسنة محاولا تأصيل هذه المسائل وإرجاعها إلى قواعدها الشرعية المتعلقة بالصيام قدر المستطاع مع التخريج ما يمكن تخريجه من هذه المسائل على ما ذكره فقهاؤنا المتقدمون رحمهم الله. He says we will go back, we will study these issues in light of the Quran and Sunnah, and we will go back to the classical fiqh and what the classical fuqaha discussed, and try to make comparisons between these new issues and the old issues. So what is takyif? So that which I mentioned, where the scholars say, what is the ashma pump in reality? Is it this scenario? Is it that scenario? This is called takyif. Now this is what I want to discuss with you. Takyif is تصنيف المسألة تحت ما يناسبها من النظر الفقهي أو رد المسألة أصل من الأصول الشرعية. It is categorizing an issue with that which is similar to it. ويكون التكييف بعد التصور الصحيح فيضعها في بابها موطنها إلحاقا بنصوص بدلالة العموم والمفهوم أو الإيماء والإشارة والقياس أو بالاجتهاد في إلحاق هذه النازلة بما يشابهها من النزال المتقدمة لتقاس عليها وتأخذ حكمها، وبعد أن يتم التكييف الصحيح للنازلة يكون التخريج. So firstly we make takyif. Takyif is this comparison between these contemporaneous issues and classical issues. Then we do takhrij after knowing the surah, okay, saying ashma pump is similar to that. The using anesthesia is something similar to that. The dialysis is similar to that in classical fiqh. After that we do takhrij, and takhrij is نقل حكم مسألة إلى ما يشبهها والتسوية بينهما فيه. It's taking the ruling of that classical issue and transferring it to this new issue. So the first step is takyif. After understanding what it is, after having a conceptual idea of what it is, then we go to takhrij. Then we go to takhrij. And that can take many forms. We can say, number one, al-bahth anha fi nusus al-kitab wa sunnah. One way of takyif is when we look at the Quran and the Sunnah and we look at those evidences that are generic. Aw al-mafhum aw bil-ishara. Example of that is the scholars discuss the issue of wearing a wig. Now, there's no explicit evidence in the Quran and the Sunnah that prohibits the wearing of a wig. However, we have a hadith with the Prophet ﷺ, لَعَنَ اللَّهُ الْوَاصِلَةَ وَالْمُسْتَوْصِلَةَ. The Prophet ﷺ cursed, or Allah Azza wa Jal cursed, the wasila, the one who does the hair extension, and the mustawsila, the one who requests it. So the scholars say the issue of the wig is analogous to what? To extending your hair. To extending your hair. So that's an example of takyif. When the scholars looked at generic ayat or ahadith. Also, what they could do is, another way of takyif and takhrij is, when they look at masail that were discussed in the past and they say this mas'ala is very similar to that mas'ala in the past. An example of that is the ruling of eating at a buffet. Remember, buffet, you're paying 300 rand, but there's a huge possibility that you might be eating 500 rand worth of food. The scholars discuss this mas'ala in light of using a hammam. Now, hammam is like a public bathing space where people pay money to wash themselves and shower. So they say this is very similar to the issue of the bathing space, where you pay a certain amount of money, but the amount of water and the amount of time that you spend in that place is unknown. And so this is analogous to the issue of eating at a buffet, because you might be eating 20 rand worth of food, but you pay 300 rand. You might be eating 300 rand worth of food, even though you paid 100 rands. Another form of takyif and takhrij is fitting this new mas'ala تحت القواعد الفقهية والأصول الشرعية, under a قاعدة فقهية. An example of that is the permissibility of making sa'i on the upper floors. So remember, in the time of Rasulullah, people made it. The people were obviously very limited. It was in the vicinity of the Kaaba. Now there are floors, different adwar, different levels that you can make the sa'i on. Now with the expansion of the haram, there are different floors. And the scholars for this, they say, there's a principle that they've taken out from the various works of fiqh. They have read through fiqh and they've extrapolated a dhabit. And that dhabit is al-hawa, that which is in the sky. يَأْخُذْ حُكْمَ الْقَرَارِ, takes the same ruling of that which is on the ground. So someone cannot build something above my house, suspend it somehow, and have it hanging over my house. Why? Because that which is above my house belongs to me as well. Al-hawa ya'khudh hukm al-qarar. And so they say that which is in the sky takes the ruling of that which is on the ground. So similarly, the tawaf will be valid, the sa'i will be valid, and the tawaf for that matter will be valid upstairs, because it takes the same ruling of that which is on ground level. And there are many other ways that they go about doing this. And so this is called takhrij and takyif. Takyif means having a tasawwur of the issue, conceptualizing the mas'ala. That's why if someone asks you some complicated mas'ala on Islamic finance, it's just not about a yes or no. You, the talib, the alim, you have to first conceptualize that. Okay, he spoke about this. Okay, what in our classical fiqh, what do we have? We have riba, we have qimar, we have gambling, games of chance, we have riba, we have gharar, great levels of uncertainty, jahala. All of these aspects in the fiqh we have, what is contained within that financial contract to make it unlawful. If that contract is void of any of these prohibited things, then the contract will be valid or the job will be valid. So when someone asks you a question like that, you first need to make tasawwur. You first need to think through. This is called takif. Then you try to compare it with something that's mentioned in the nusus of the Quran and the Sunnah, or in the classical fiqh, or al-qawa'id al-fiqhiyya. Then you have a tasawwur of it. Now you do takhrij. Now you extrapolate the ruling of that particular mas'ala. And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. Another issue when it comes to not fasting is, when is it wajib not to fast? A lady who is breastfeed, a lady who is in hayd, or nifas, postpartum bleeding. When is it permissible not to fast? Traveling and being sick. When is it haram not to fast? It's haram not to fast. This is in the case of someone who delays his qada until the new Ramadan comes in. So example, if you have 10 days left, you have 10 days of qada, and there are only 10 days left before Ramadan, the new Ramadan comes in. For those 10 days, you are in sin. For those 10 days, you are in sin. Why? Because it's haram not to fast during those days. You need to fast during those 10 days. And the not fasting of the insane person is not given any ruling. It's not haram, it's not jaiz, it's not, because fasting in essence does not apply to that person. Some of the other masail that the Shafi'i madhab discusses, al-qa'ida anna ma wasil ila al-jawfi min ayn yuftir illa sab'ah. Anything that reaches the bodily cavity, which we will discuss, breaks the fast except 7 things, according to the Shafi'i school. Ma yasil ila al-jawfi nisyanan, that which enters into the bodily cavity out of forgetfulness. Ma yasil ila al-jawfi jahlan, out of ignorance. Ma yasil ilayhi ikrahan, that which reaches the bodily cavity, you were forced to take it in. جريان الريق بما بين أسنانه وقد بما بين أسنانه وقد عجز عن مجه. If saliva takes food between your teeth down, no matter how minuscule the food is, and you were able to remove it. ما وصل إلى الجوف من غبار الطريق, that which enters into your jawf, into your bodily cavity, such as the dust on a road. ما وصل إليه من غربلة الدقيق, if there's like flour, the sieved flour, if it goes down, that doesn't break your fast. وما وصل إليه من ذباب وبعوضة ونحوهما, and that which goes down, such as a fly goes down, all of those things are exempted from the rule of breaking your fast. And Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. So that which is agreed upon by the scholars are only 3 things: intimacy, eating and drinking. The rest are all matters that are open to difference of opinion. Also, another thing is, when I do mention to you, so if I'm going to mention to you the different views of on a particular issue, I'll cluster all the evidences. Even the Shafi madhab doesn't use that evidence. Maybe the Hanafi madhab uses that evidence. If they agree on a mas'ala, I'll just mention all the evidences and the arguments that they use. So that's important to keep in mind as well. Is everybody still with me? Okay, I think we can start, inshallah ta'ala. So the author rahimahullah ta'ala says, ما يفطر بلا خلاف ولا تفصيل, that which breaks the fast without difference of opinion within the Shafi madhab, ولا تفصيل, nor is there any detail required. Keep in mind, what the author mentions here is the relied upon view within the Shafi madhab. I will mention other opinions as well. The author rahimahullah ta'ala says, بخاخ ربو والدخان أكمل. The first issue that he mentions is بخاخ ربو, the ashma palm. The ashma palm. Now, according to the Shafi madhab, use of the ashma pump breaks the fast. The use of the ashma pump breaks the fast. So in these 3 lines, we will discuss the following things: the use of the ashma pump, smoking, whether it is hookah, whether it is cigarettes, whether it is vapes, suppositories, both suppositories that are entered into the front or at the back, enemas, and anything that enters the qubul and the dubar, anything that enters from in front or at the back. We will speak about the endoscopy, a scope that goes down, anything that enters through the nose and the mouth. And we will speak about al-qasra al-bawliya, which is a urinary catheter. These are some of the things that we'll be discussing, inshallah ta'ala, over here. So the asthma pump. What is the asthma pump? The scholars say the asthma pump it's basically an inhaler that sprays or releases medication into the airways to help a person breathe. The asthma pump consists of what? Of water, concentrated oxygen, and medicinal substances. And the purpose of this is to widen the bronchial airways. So the scholars say it's made up of الماء, water, والثاني غاز الأكسجين, oxygen, والثالث المواد العلاجية التي يقصد أن تصل إلى الجهاز التنفسي, goes to the person's lungs, and a small amount of it, does it go to the abdominal area? We will discuss. The lungs are considered part of the bodily cavity, the jawf, and anything that reaches the bodily cavity normally breaks the fast. The abdomen, the bottom, is considered a bodily cavity, whether it's the respiratory or the digestive system. This is something that I wanted to mention. So I mentioned to you what the classical fuqaha have stated. What is a jawf? Modern doctors, and these are doctors who sit on fiqh councils, they say in reality, so remember, you must understand the fuqaha when they discuss what is intended by a jawf, and is there a connection between the ear and the jawf? Is there a connection? These were discussed based upon the knowledge of anatomy at their time. Modern doctors say, however, the jawf refers to al-jihad. In reality, al-jawf al-mu'tamar. Al-jawf al-mu'tabar refers to al-jihaz al-hadmi. It refers to the digestive system, or ma jawaz al-fam wal-bal'um min al-jihaz al-hadmi, or what is beyond the mouth and the pharynx of the digestive system, and it includes the stomach and the intestines. So this is what medical doctors of today, those who sit on fiqh councils, this is what they say is the jawf. So obviously that will exclude much of what the fuqaha discussed when it comes to the jawf, but we'll discuss inshallah. We know what the jawf, we know what the asthma pump is. So there are two opinions with regards to, does the asthma pump break your fast or not? This is among the contemporary scholars because this is a relatively new thing. The first opinion is the asthma pump, the asthma inhaler does not break your fast. The asthma inhaler does not break your fast. That's number one. Why am I mentioning the difference of opinion? It's important for talib al-ilm to know the difference of opinion within a particular mas'ala, because it helps you understand that in certain cases you are allowed to dispense a different opinion. And that's what many scholarly bodies, even the local scholarly body in Cape Town, when they do mention that it breaks your fast, they will say there is an alternative view on the issue. So similarly, knowing the alternative view is very important. It's very important. You might not follow the alternative view. You might not dispense it. But it is important to know that an alternative view on the issue exists. So those who say it doesn't break the fast, number one, and this is generally held by the Saudi scholars and the scholars of the Gulf area. So scholars of Kuwait, scholars of Qatar, scholars of Saudi Arabia, particularly those who follow the Hanbali school. Now, obviously, even if you ask maybe an Egyptian alim who's a Hanbali in Egypt, he'll say maybe it breaks the fast. Because this is a contemporary mas'ala. The classical fuqaha didn't speak about the asthma pump. And so, why would two Hanbalis differ on this particular issue? It goes back to the takhrij of the mas'ala and the takyif, how they view the mas'ala and what ruling they give to the mas'ala. So this scholar is the predominant view among most Saudi scholars where I live, and scholars of the Gulf basically. And this is also the Lajna Da'ima, the permanent committee for fatwa. This is their view. Number one, why do they say it does not break the fast? They say the inhaler, the use of the asthma pump, is not for the purpose of nourishment. It's not mughadhi. It doesn't give your body nourishment. It's not intended for hydration or nutrition. It is medicinal in nature. even though it does contain some amount of water, it's not consumed as a drink. The second issue is, so that's the first one. The second issue is, they say the amount of water, the amount that the typical inhaler contains about 10 milliliters for every 200 puffs. 10 milliliters for every 200 puffs. That means each puff, what goes down is less than a drop, 0.05 milliliters per puff. And they then say that most of that goes to the respiratory system. And even if something reaches the jawf, the abdominal area, it is extremely minuscule and small. And thus they say it does not break the fast. Thus they say it does not break the fast. And they make qiyas upon the issue of madmada and istinshaq. They say when you take wudu, the Sharia has allowed you to use water. There is a possibility when you take wudu that there's one droplet that remains in your mouth and goes down. And the Sharia has overlooked that. So like the Sharia has overlooked that, qiyasan ala dhalik, we will say if something goes down, which we are doubting, then it is overlooked by the Sharia. So that 0.05 milliliters that goes, some of it's taken by the respiratory system, and what remains, which is even a small amount, goes down, if it goes down. They say the medication, another argument that they make is, the medication travels to the air passages, the lungs and the bronchi, and it does not intentionally reach the abdomen, the abdominal area. They also say that there is a doubt that it actually reaches there. How do we know that it actually reaches there? We don't know. And they say, al-aslu baqa'u sawm. The foundational principle is that the fast is valid. وَالْيَقِينَ لَا يَزُولُ بِشَكٍّ. We are certain we are fasting. There's doubt whether the fast is broken. We don't go with the doubt, we go with the certainty. Al-yaqin la yazulu bi-shak. They say, al-aslu sihhatu siyam. ولا يترك هذا الأصل وهذا اليقين إلا بيقين مثله. وصول شيء من هذا الرذاذ وهذه المادة إلى المعدة أمر مشكوك فيه. They say the rule is that your fast is valid. That's the certainty. The uncertainty is, did some of that go down? We cannot leave certainty for doubt. لأن الأصل أن هذه المادة تذهب إلى الجهاز التنفسي فوصول شيء منها إلى المعدة هذا أمر مشكوك فيه واليقين لا يزول بالشك. So we mentioned the qiyas that they make on madmada and istinshaq. The Prophet ﷺ said to Laqid bin Sabra, put water in your nose, go to the extreme except when you're fasting. The Prophet said to him, the Prophet allowed for him to use water in his nose with the possibility of water going, with a drop going down. Despite that possibility, the Prophet didn't say his fast is broken. And thus they say the inhaler is the same in this respect. They say, they also made another qiyas is that the Sharia allows us to use siwak whilst fasting. Yes, according to the Shafi madhab, up until zawal, after zawal it becomes makruh to use the siwak, but not haram. That's why Imam Nawawi rahimahullah has his own ikhtiyar on this mas'ala. Imam Nawawi rahimahullah does not follow the view of that it is makruh. He says you can use the miswak all day. And this is the view of the Hanabil as well. You can use the miswak all day. They say, why would the Sharia allow you to use the miswak when the miswak contains 8 chemical substances? Scientifically, it has been studied that the siwak contains 8 chemical substances. It is very possible that traces of the siwak might mix with your saliva and be swallowed. Yet using miswak is still permissible. Thus, the inhaler is comparable to this. The inhaler is comparable to this. And Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. So these are some of the evidences mentioned by those who say that the ashman pump does not break the fast. So we mentioned, just as a recap, inshallah ta'ala, they make qiyas upon madmada and istinshaq. They say it is literally 1 microgram. So we said 0.05 milliliters. It's 1 microgram that is split up between the pharyngeal wall. Some of it goes to the pharyngeal wall, the pharynx. Some of it goes to the respiratory system. And maybe the leftover goes to the abdomen, maybe. And subhanAllah, that's such a minuscule amount. It must be overlooked by the Sharia. They make qiyas on the siwak. Number 3, they say it's not food and drinks. Number 4, they say it is not definite that something actually goes down. There's a doubt. So those are the arguments of those who say it does not break. This is not the Shafi position. This is the alternative position. The view of those who state it does break the fast. And this is majority of the contemporary scholars today. Among the Hanafis, among the Shafi'is, famous scholars that held this view is Wahb al-Zuhayli, the great jurist from Damascus that passed away a few years ago, and Mufti Taqi Usmani also is of this view. They say it breaks your fast for the following reasons. Number 1, it is something that goes into a manfadh maftuh. It is administered through the mouth, which is a manfadh maftuh. And anything that enters the body, the jawf, this internal bodily cavity, through an open passage such as the mouth, it breaks the fast. They say even if it's a small amount that enters the abdomen, it breaks the fast. And they bring an argument where they say that 80% of that 1 microgram, 80% of that 1 microgram, they argue, enters the abdominal area. They also make the argument, they say, no matter if it is a small amount, the amount being small, minuscule or not, does not affect the ruling. And that's why even the classical fuqaha discussed this. They say that even if a tiny measurable substance reaches the bodily cavity, the jawf, it breaks the fast. Also, they say it contains a tangible substance because, as we mentioned, it is made up of water, concentrated oxygen, and medicinal fluids. And thus, according to them, it will break the fast. So those are the 2 views on the issue, right? Now, here are some responses. This is what the scholars who state that the inhaler breaks the fast, what they respond to those who state that the inhaler does not break the fast. They say, you say that we make qiyas upon the madmada, that there's a possibility that a droplet remains behind and it goes down. We say this qiyas is invalid. This qiyas of making qiyas of the ashma pump, the inhaler upon madmada, this is an invalid qiyas. This is al-qiyas ma al-farid. Because the ashma pump is directed at the throat and the jawf. But as for cleaning the mouth, the madmada is directed at the mouth. You're cleaning your mouth. You're not cleaning your throat. You're cleaning your mouth. So they say this qiyas does not stand up. They say number 2, as for you saying that the Sharia allows us to use the siwak, and the siwak contains about 8 chemicals. And it is very possible that when you're using the siwak, that mixes with your saliva and it goes down. They say that which is overlooked. This is the view of the scholars who argue that the ashma inhaler breaks your fast. They say that which is overlooked is normally that which is difficult to avoid. Number 3, the ashma pump is not food and drink. What do the scholars who advocate that it does break your fast, how do they respond to that? They say, even though it is not food and drinks, that does not exclude it from being a nullifier, because we give consideration to that which enters the jawf out of choice. And what does so mean? So means al-imsak, refraining. And refraining can only be realized and come into existence when everything and anything that could potentially enter the jawf is refrained from. Another argument that those who state that it doesn't break the fast, they say there's no certainty that something actually goes down. These scholars who state that it does break the fast, they say it is medically proven that 80% of that 1 microgram goes to the abdomen, and the rest goes to the respiratory system. And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best, and there are more arguments. And then these scholars who state it does not break the fast, they respond to the arguments of those who state it does break the fast. So obviously, for you to understand all the arguments, you need to listen to it again. Those who state it does not break the fast, their arguments, they say, we shouldn't consider as a rule that anything that reaches the jawf, the bodily cavity, breaks your fast. Consideration should be given to eating and drinking, and that which is in the meaning and the form of eating and drinking. Because they say the inhaler is not eating and drinking, so it doesn't break the fast. Also, they say that the majority of the scholars, they use an athar, a riwayah, a narration of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, where he said, al-fitru ma dakhal, the fast is broken by whatever enters. They say, number one, this riwayah this athar is weak. But also they're saying, this does not refer to anything that enters. Here the Prophet used the generic statement to refer to those things that normally enter, which is food and drinks. So they say that athar cannot be used for anything that enters the jawf. And if you go by the literal implication of that riwayah, anything that enters, then you should make the argument that anything that even enters your pores, that goes through the pores, if you put a cream on and that cream is absorbed by your pores, that should also break the fast. But those scholars that state the ashma pump breaks, they don't say that breaks. So if you're using that athar of Ibn Abbas, you have to take it to its logical conclusion. They say, yes, we know there's the possibility that something might enter into your jawf, but this is something that the Sharia has overlooked because it is so minuscule. It's a negligible amount. So those are some of the arguments that the scholars have used in ascertaining the ruling of the ashma pump. Just want to see if there's anything else. So they have arguments, and there's an excellent doctoral thesis that I read. It's called المفطرات الطبية المعاصرة, modern medical nullifiers of the fast. It's written by a doctor called Dr. Abdul Razak al-Kindi. It's a Yemeni scholar, and he wrote this 500-page, not too big. He wrote it as a PhD thesis at the University of Malaysia. I think he's a lecturer here in Saudi Arabia, but he did the PhD. And he basically took all the studies of those who came before him and he summarized it. And then he gave his personal views on many of these issues. So what he will do is, he will mention the example of those scholars who state that the ashma pump does break the fast and mention the evidences. Those who state it does not break your fast and mention the evidences. Then he'll mention the responses of those who state it does break to those who state it doesn't break. And the responses of those who state it doesn't break to those who state it breaks. And then he will make tarjih at the end. He will choose an appropriate view. He will choose the view that sits well with him. But these are some of the arguments that the scholars, there are many more arguments that I'm just skipping through. There are many more arguments that I have in front of me. I have like, subhanAllah, so many. Okay. So the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, then goes on and he says, the second one is, the second issue is, he says, Bakhahu Rabwin, the ashma pump. So we've discussed that in detail, inshallah. You can refer to you can refer back to this. وَالدُّخَانُ أَكْمَلُ, and all types of smoking. مَدَاعَةٌ وَشِيشَةٌ مُعَسِّلَةٌ. Mada'atun, washisha, mu'assila, it's all different types of, the hookah pipes and the tobacco that is used, vapes, cigarettes. The author mentions the same thing in multiple and different ways because for the flow of the poem, basically. But basically, all types of smoking will nullify the fast. Will nullify the fast. And this is basically a mas'ala that's mujma' alayh. It's agreed upon بين المعاصرين, between the contemporary scholars. أجمع الفقهاء المعاصرون على أن شرب الدخان مفسد للصيام. Any smoking, tobacco, flavored tobacco breaks the fast. In الموسوعة الفقهية, the famous Kuwaiti encyclopedia of fiqh, اتفق الفقهاء على أن شرب الدخان المعروف أثناء الصوم يفسد الصيام لأنه من المفطرات. The fuqaha have agreed that smoking whilst fasting nullifies the fast because it is one of the nullifiers of fasting. And the reason being is, so this is smoking these things. However, if you are walking and there's smoke somehow and you breathe in the smoke, that will not nullify the fast. The scholars say, why does smoking break your fast? Because tobacco is such, and it is made up of so many different things. لِكَثَافَتِ, because of the thickness of it. تَنْفَصِلْ مِنْهُ عَيْنٍ, a substance is then comes from it. A substance comes from it. And they say يَتَوَلَّدْ مِنْهُ عَيْنٍ. Thus, like Shaykh the Nadhim, when I listen to his sharh, he says if you keep a cigarette against a piece of material, you will see that if you allow the smoke to go against a piece of material and you keep it in an enclosed place, what happens is the material will turn yellow. And that's a sign that what comes from the cigarette is an ayn. And that's an ayn that enters a manfadh maftuh, an open passage, and it goes down to the jawf. It goes down to the bodily cavity. And this has been stated by many scholars of the Shafi madhab. Muhammad bin Ahmad Abdul Bari al-Ahdal from Yemen. He's from the muta'akhirin among the Shafi'iyya. And there are many ulama who discuss this issue. الشرواني says in his حاشية عن تحفة المحتاج ومن العين الدخان المشهور وهو المسمى بتة ومثله التنباك فيفطر به الصائم لأن له أثرا يحس كما يشاهد في باطن العود وفي التحفة وفتح الجواد عدم الضرر الدخان وقال okay. So that is basically an issue that there's not much to discuss over there. There's a little booklet written on this called وضوح البطلان بالحكم بعدم الفطر بالإبرة بحكم في نهار رمضان ما نصه بخلاف ما في عين كرائحة التنباك فيفطر به لأنه لكثافة تنفصل منه عين. So there's not much discussion on that. So all of those things will break the fast. The author rahimahullah goes on and he says كذا التحاميل. He then says similarly تحاميل. تحاميل is what we said refers to suppositories. It refers to suppositories. Now there are different types of suppositories. There are those who enter into the vaginal area and there are those who enter into the rectum. So let's discuss inshallah that quickly. So the author says at-tahamil. So what is the takyif of this mas'ala among the contemporary scholars? Tahamil refers to suppositories. Suppositories is a solid thing that you place into the rectum or the vaginal area. Normally it's placed in the rectum when the person requires, when the person cannot, when the person has tummy issues. And then there's something called the enema as well. The enema is a liquid that is placed. But let's discuss this first. Number one, the scholars discuss this issue. So we'll first discuss the suppository that enters the vaginal area. The classical fuqaha used to discuss at-taqtir fi farj al-mar'ah, when drops goes into the vagina of the lady. So the classical fuqaha the majority of the scholars, that's Shafi'is, Hanafis, Malikis, Hanbalis, they stated that it breaks your fast. However, among some of the Malikis and some of the Hanbalis, they said it doesn't break your fast. Remember, before we come to the contemporary mas'ala, we need to discuss the classical view. And they say the vaginal area is not, it's not the batin, it's not the inside. We consider that as the zahir. So it's like keeping something on your hand. That doesn't break your fast. So they say the vaginal area is fi hukm al-zahir. So that's the difference of opinion among the classical scholars. Then the contemporary scholars, they look at that and they say, well, if a suppository goes into the vaginal area of the lady, does it break the fast or doesn't it break the fast? Many of the contemporary scholars, such as Wahb Zuhaili and the Nazim, the composer of this poem, they believe that it breaks your fast. What are the evidences? Number one, they use a statement attributed to Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu that says, Al-fitru mimma dakhal. The fast breaks from that which enters. And this is something that enters, number one. Number two, they say anything inside of the vaginal area is considered min al-jawf. So whatever enters it, whether it is dry or in the form of a liquid, breaks the fast. And also they argue that what is the requirement of fasting? It is imsak. And thus, if something enters the vaginal area, such as a suppository, we are not fulfilling that required imsak, and thus the fast is broken. These are the arguments that state it breaks your fast, and that is the author, the Nazim, that is his opinion, and many contemporary scholars, and that's the position of the contemporary Shafi'is. Then there are those who state it does not break your fast. It does not break your fast. And that's majority of the Shafi'is, the contemporary Hanabila, those who died in the 20 years ago, such as Shaykh ibn Uthaymin, rahimahullah, Shaykh ibn Baz, also Shaykh Yusuf al-Qardawi. This is the view of the permanent committee of scholars, and it is the view of the based in Jeddah. They view that vaginal suppositories does not break your fast. And what is the evidences that they use? They say, number one, the evidence used by those scholars who do state it breaks your fast, it's weak. And even if we do, supposedly we say it's authentic. The narration says, Al-fitru mimma dakhal. The fast breaks for that which enters. They say, what was possibly meant here was what? That those normal things, such as food and drink, that enters the normal passages through the mouth. Also, they argue that it is proven through anatomy, through the study of the body today, that there's no connection between the uterus, the vagina, the uterus and the vagina and the digestive system. There's no connection. So what goes in there doesn't affect the abdominal area. Another argument that they say is that this is not eating and drinking. It's not in the form of eating and drinking. It doesn't provide nutrition to the body. So it doesn't break your fast. And they say that your fast is intact as long as there's no explicit evidence to suggest otherwise, the fast will be intact. The fast will be intact. And Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll stop there for today, inshallah. May Allah Azza wa Jal grant us tawfiq and understanding. So, we are discussing the first part of this poem with regards to the nullifiers of fasting. The author divided the different nullifiers, that which breaks and that which does not break, from among the contemporary affairs into different categories. And the first category is that which unreservedly, unconditionally breaks your fast, bila khilaf, without difference of opinion within the Shafi madhab, wala tafsil, and nor is there detail. It's just unconditionally breaks your fast. And so what the author mentions here is he's representing the Shafi'i position. However, we are mentioning the position of other scholars to add some enrichment. And so that you know that on many of these issues that there are alternative views. And you, the Talib al-Ilm, the future Mufti, when people ask you these questions, you can tell them there is a relied upon view according to the Shafi madhab, but there's an alternative view within other madhahib and among other scholars. And knowing the condition of the person, you will be able to know which fatwa to dispense. As Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala says, he says the Mufti, the one who's answering the jurisconsult, he needs to know the revelation, he needs to know the Quran and the Sunnah, and by extension the Turath fiqh, the classicals fiqh scholarship, but also he needs to know the waqi', the situation of the person and the reality of the person. And without that, a person will not give an informed fatwa. So that's why we're discussing alternative views, and we're discussing I'm just summarizing everything. What I've summarized to you is probably about 100 pages of reading that I've summarized for you in like short points, inshallah, because the class is only an hour and a half. So I'm trying to summarize as much information with you. Basically, whatever I'm discussing with you, there's a lot of overlap, but it's based upon about 5 books. It's based upon the المفطرات المعاصرة by Ahmad Khalil, who's a professor at Qasim University. It's based upon the thesis that I've mentioned by Dr. Abdurazak al-Kindi, who's also living in Saudi, is a Yemeni. It's based upon the small booklet authored by Shaykh Khalid al-Mushaykh, who was one of the major scholars here in Saudi Arabia. It's based upon the explanation of Shaykh Walid al-Muallim, who did a commentary on this book. He's got an extensive 30-page, if not more, 35 pages on this poem, where he defends the Shafi position by bringing quotes and evidences for the Shafi position. Then there's also another commentary that I've gone through by Shaykh Labib Najib, who is this was his brainchild. Labib Najib, Hafidahullah, he made notes of all those contemporary things that break your fast and those contemporary things that do not break your fast in relation to the Shafi madhab. He sent it to his colleague, Shaykh Ali al-Qudaymī. Shaykh Ali al-Qudaymī converted it into a poem. And then Shaykh Labib wrote a commentary on the poem. And then also I listened to the explanation of the Nadhim himself, Shaykh Ali al-Qudaymī, because he's adra bima fihi. As the scholars say, Ahlu Makkah adra bima fiha wa adra bi shi'abiha. The people of Makkah know Makkah the best. So he is the author of this poem. You will understand what he said the best. So he has got an explanation of the poem online in about 10 parts, which comes to about an hour and a half or 2 hours of explanation. So I went through all of that, and that's what I present to you as a summary, inshallah ta'ala. May Allah Azza wa Jal grant us tawfiq and understanding. If there's anything that's not clear, feel free to ask. So I'm just mentioning the difference of opinion. You will notice I do not say this is my view, this is the preferred view, this is the strongest view. That is your job, inshallah. As the Talib al-Ilm, you will read further, inshallah, and come to those conclusions. For now, I, Shaykh, am in no position to make tarjih. I am a Talib al-Ilm, I make naql, and I report and I transmit to you what the fuqaha have said before me, and that's it. I'm not in the capacity to make tarjih based on the evidences, based on the qawa'id, based on the usul, based upon many different principles, and come to conclusions. May Allah Azza wa Jal grant us tawfiq and understanding. If there are any questions, inshallah ta'ala, feel free to ask. Barakallahu feekum and jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.